Hello, and welcome to the January 2025 first check-in of the year. Today, we're going to be talking about Lau Plans, and the title is You've Got to Have a Lau Plan. So let's get started. As always, we have our same community agreements, and I'll give you a moment to read through those. Just know that you have a voice and you should speak your truth. All right. We also have our Missouri Commitments to English Learner Success, or our blueprint. And today's message is going to incorporate all of our areas that we discuss in the blueprint. So, welcome, as I said, to our first ELD check-in of the month. We'll start with some WIDA updates and discuss some PD opportunities that are available to you. And then we'll discuss the purpose of the Lau plans, the components of a Lau plan, some program models, and provide you with some samples or examples. As always, please make sure that you sign in on the note taker, whether you watch this live or watch the recording, so that we have a record of who has been in attendance. Thank you. All right, so starting with some WIDA updates. WIDA is accepting nominations for the 25-26 cohort of the WIDA Fellows. 20 expert educators are going to be selected. They can either be nominated by someone, or I believe you're able to apply on your own if you were interested. So there's a link there for that. Also, as many of you are probably now aware, Drew Lincoln is no longer with DESE, and his position has not been filled. Sean Bates has taken over EL assessment, and he and I are tag teaming to answer any questions you may have. Since we are new to the WIDA assessment side of things, a lot of your questions may be better answered by going to the DRC customer service site, and I provided the email for that and the phone access to that as well. These are some of the things that they will answer questions about. Materials ordering is a big thing right now, and also managing your AMS system is also a big question for them to answer for you and provide assistance, because they know the ins and outs of setting up the program and working with it. All right. Next are some updates from OELA. They have been doing a long-term research on long-term English learners and produced this infographic that outlines their findings. So it's very informative, so I wanted to share that with you. And then they've also partnered with iCivics to create a Making Civics Education Accessible for English Learners and Multilingual Learners document. And I thought that it would be valuable for you to see as well. So those are both active links. In addition, there is a dual language immersion project playbook that was put out by NCELA. That talks about English language acquisition and language instruction educational programs. So I thought that was valuable for you to have as well. All right, the next slide will give you a timeline for access. If you haven't bookmarked this already, this gives you another place where you can go to see those deadlines that we have in place for this year and when you can expect your reports. So upcoming PD, as far as I know, these are still a go. We have always have things listed that are provided by the state on the DESE curriculum calendar, and you can find those in that link. Most everything that's on that calendar also will take you to the registration link. Then February 20th in Kansas City, we have Carol Salva giving us an update to her boosting achievement. She's issued a new version of that wonderful book, and you can register to attend that through a link there. Then in Springfield, on March 26th, we have on the slate a conference with Andrea Hollingsfield as the keynote. And again, you can register through a link there. Then Elevate will be providing 2 separate sessions this year, one in St. Louis, June 3rd and 4th, and one in Kansas City on June 5th. And more information regarding that and where you can register and hear about who's going to be there and speaking will be coming soon. Excuse me. As always, we will have our monthly check-ins. So today, as I said, is talking about program and Lau Plans. February will be about English learners with disabilities. March will discuss supporting those nearly proficient, those high intermediate or above English learners, level 3 and above usually, and how we work with them so that they're not long-term English learners. Then in April, we'll be discussing family engagement as we plan for the coming year. And in May, we'll go over analyzing your access growth as we do most years. So hope to see you at our future check-ins. As I do every month, I'd like to also remind you of our self-paced e-learning that's available to any and all Missouri educators. And if you're interested and don't have a WIDA secure portal account where you can access those, please let me know and I can set any teacher up so that they can log on and participate in that self-paced e-learning. All right, we're going to jump right in. So the lack of understanding of ELs, of multilingualism and multiculturalism can have damaging consequences, not only for teachers and students involved, but for the schools. That quote comes from what school leaders need to know about English learners. And I think it sets the stage for what we're going to be talking about today. So we need to have some understanding and we need to know how the process and the program of English language acquisition works. So I'm going to start out with some myths about second language acquisition and second language learning. So let's see how we can do with these. This first myth says that children learn languages more easily and quickly than adults. All right, so that is a misconception. People believe that learning a second language is easier for children. And it probably comes from observations that children often develop a more native-like language skills than adult learners. But does this mean that children have an easier time than adults do overall? And what do we mean by easier anyway? Well, one reason people think learning language is easier for children is because we tend to imagine them learning in an immersive environment. And an immersive environment stimulates language acquisition by providing motivation and input at a time when the brain can easily make new connection. This often results in native-like command of the language where you sound like the native English speakers. But on the other hand, adults tend to learn in a classroom environment, and even after years of study, they may feel like they make mistakes or that their accent isn't as good as the native speaker. To put this in perspective in terms of time, it takes at least 4 years of constant input and interaction for a child to develop their first language. excuse me, and about 5 to 7 years for a child to achieve native-like proficiency in a second language. However, it isn't unheard of for a motivated adult learning under optimal conditions to achieve high language proficiency at that same rate or even quicker than children. That's because they have already made the connections to language and they know how language works. So in some instances, it moves more quickly. But again, we're all unique and we learn in different ways. So we need to keep that in mind. Okay, myth number 2. It takes 1 to 2 years to acquire the English language. Under normal circumstances, most people cannot fully learn a new language in a few months, despite what some of the marketing campaigns might claim. It's true, you can learn phrases and words and concepts, and under optimal conditions, you can achieve a relatively high level of proficiency in a short period of time. However, acquiring a complete system of a language and becoming a fluent speaker typically requires years of intensive study and practice. And our goal here in Missouri is 6 years. And if you look at the research, you can find that it takes up to 10 years. And to learn academic language can take a lifetime because we're all academic language learners. In addition, there are factors like age, language similarity, motivation, and the time you spend on learning that can influence how quickly you learn the language. So there are other factors involved. Okay, myth number 3. The more time people spend in a second or foreign language context, the more quickly they learn the language. So this kind of gets at immersion. It's a misconception that you need to live in a country where the language is spoken in order to learn that language. You can find native speakers of most languages all over the world, and there are many other ways to connect with speakers or find resources in the target language right where you live. In fact, many individuals who live in foreign countries as adults never learn the local language. So living or studying abroad is no guarantee that you're going to learn that language. And besides, there are many factors that affect language learning success that are more important than where you are. So don't let location limit your imagination. All right. Myth number 4. Children learning English will learn faster if their parents speak English at home. And I hear this one a lot. One thing, parents are able to provide richer vocabulary and descriptions in their speech, giving children more tools to describe and relate to the world around them. So they're learning from their parents things that they don't have the English for yet. This knowledge provides children with a greater foundation for later English learning. So there are many benefits to immersing your child in your native language. And also there's the factor that parents need to be parents, and parenting is the greatest task parents engage in and at home, not language teaching. They need to use the language or languages which they use in their home to best fulfill their duties as parents and helping children to develop and grow into healthy and self-reliant adults. A language is just a language. People can acquire additional languages at any age, but parenting has time limits, and those years are needed to nurture their children and shouldn't be sidelined and inflated with the inflated notions of the importance of learning English. All right, myth number 5. The more children are immersed in English at school, the faster they will learn English. Again, if you believe that more second language is always better, it follows that in school, all the second language would be best. But as we talked about before, More is not always better. And where children are acquiring a second language at school, we have a very we have very strong evidence that point to the value of instruction in the first language. Collier and Thomas in 2004 conducted research on second language acquisition in school, and they investigated the effects of different models. In their research, they found that dual language models outperformed by far any other English-only models. So, using the child's first language is very beneficial in helping them learn the second language. And they have less frustration and feeling of being left out when we use some of their language as well. Okay, myth number 6. All people acquire language in the same way. If we could look inside a language learning classroom around the world, we would come to the conclusion that many teachers teach as if everyone learned in the same way. Most of the time, students are doing the same things, and more often than not, what they're doing involves talking to each other, silent students, and a textbook. So, how do language learners differ? Some investigations into this question have led researchers to propose ideal language learner qualities, such as tolerance for ambiguity, the ability not to fixate on unknown language, but an attempt to get the gist of something that is read or heard, willingness to communicate, and engage in communication, even when you lack some of the words or the structure, searching for patterns, looking at language as a puzzle and seeing patterns and connections. However, language learners do not necessarily exhibit all of those qualities, and they differ in the degree to which they possess these ideal language learner characteristics. And the degree in which they can develop these ways if they're provided teaching towards those goals. Learners also differ, of course, in personality. It's often thought that personality characteristics like being an extrovert enhance language, but in reality, this is unproven. Extroverts certainly have some qualities that help them with language learner, but they may also listen less and that listening would be ideal for language acquisition. And they may be inclined to develop fluency at the expense of accuracy because they're in a hurry. Still, introverts and extroverts and other personality differences do play a role in the type of language activities which are motivating and stimulating for the learners. Finally, we couldn't discuss this without mentioning cultural influence on language. Do Japanese learners acquire language just as well, even though they may speak less? Do Americans learning a foreign language benefit more from learner choice than other nationalities might? Do Brazilian English learners do best with highly collaborative and relational classroom activities? Well, researchers are engaged in many studies about the effects of cultural difference on language acquisition. And any English teacher working with a specific cultural group would be well served by investigating what cultural influences can be found. Though we know that all learners do not acquire language in exactly the same ways, actual research on the effects of learning styles, cultural, and other differences is very limited. What is our takeaway then? Well, first, certainly learners are different in all kinds of ways. And if a class is small, it's good for us as teachers to know their learners well and teach in ways that will be motivating and effective for those students. Second, learners' differences should not be a noose around the neck of the teacher of a large class. If a teacher has many students, the point to remember is that variety is needed. Regardless of learning styles, all learners need to read, write, and engage in oral communication every day. And all learners benefit from a diverse kinds of activities every day. All right, so all of our students are different. They don't learn the same way. Each one is unique. All right, I've added a seventh myth here. You have to speak the language of the learners in order to teach them English. And I hear this a lot, and sometimes it's even set as a requirement for the teacher. This is a persistent myth that sometimes prevents people from entering the ESL profession or even volunteering to help with English learners. The fact is that we teach language primarily in the target language, so in English. The language students are trying to learn English, so we want to expose them to English as much as possible. So English classes should be taught in English using words and structures that are appropriate for the student's level. We do not rely on translation when we're teaching a language. In fact, too much translation hinders language acquisition. In many English teaching contexts, there are students from several different native languages in one classroom. So this is an additional reason why we need to keep the language of the classroom in the target language of English. This isn't to say that English teachers should not learn the language of their students if all their students especially speak the same language. If an English teacher is living and working, say, in a country like Korea, the classroom of students who share Korean as their native language, the teacher should, of course, take some classes and try to learn the Korean language so she can communicate better with them. This would be very beneficial for her teaching of English, as she would have a better understanding of how the two languages are common and different. And also, it can help establish common relationships with the learners because she could talk to them in their mother tongue, or he. And it would help her identify more empathy for the learners as she's trying to learn a language as well. However, it's important to understand that good language teaching relies on an understanding of language acquisition and the skills and methodologies that we use to foster language acquisition. It doesn't rely on knowledge of the student's native language. All right. So all of these things, understanding these myths, should lead us to some wonderings. Whose responsibility is it for these students to acquire language and context? How are you ensuring that all teachers are being held accountable? And based on what we just talked about, what are some things that you might look for in your schools? Language acquisition is a subject about which a lot of people have a lot of opinions. After all, everyone has learned a language, and many of us have watched our own children learn their language and have engaged in, some of us have engaged in second language learning in college and high school, whether we were successful or not. So language acquisition isn't like like learning law or nuclear physics or computer technology. If these topics come up, we would probably talk to an expert rather than relying on our own knowledge, and we recognize those experts for what they know. With language acquisition, it tends to be different. Many people think they know more about language acquisition than they actually do. And so there are many popular misconceptions about how people learn language. Though you may not believe all of the myths, especially now that you've heard some of these and the responses to the myths, it's still beneficial for you to become familiar with those myths and the theories and research which debunk them. So that's why I've shared that with you. Okay, so now what? What do we do now? First of all, we're going to talk about the purpose of the district EL plan or Lau plan. DESE has a legal responsibility under ESEA, ESSA, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act, and the Equal Educational Opportunities Act. The responsibility is to ensure that all LEAs meet the federal requirements to properly identify, to assess, and to support English learners through effective EL programs and providing their parents with a transparent picture of what those programs are and how they're implemented. There's also a requirement that all LEAs submit an annual district-wide EL plan to DESE, whether you have English learners in your school now or not. Okay, so let's find out what you know about the Lau plans. And to do this, I wanted to share a quizzes. If you're not familiar with this platform, it's like a game show. Um, it's really a very good program for the teacher because it gives her or he immediate feedback on what the students know. It can also provide the responses for immediate feedback to the student. And you can create quizzes that are online, or you can even create paper pencil quizzes. And as you see on the screen, this crafting a Lau plan quizzes I've created as a worksheet for those of you who are not joining us live. Then you can go on and look at that at your leisure and participate as well. I also created an anticipation guide for this activity if you'd like to use it in that way with educators in your district. So I'm going to pause now and we're going to do this quizzes through the platform. Okay, welcome back. So a little bit more about Lau plans or EL plans. They are named after a Supreme Court case, Lau versus Nichols. So that's the basis of these regulations and requirements. And what they say is that all LEAs are required to develop a local plan. And that meets civil rights and equal education opportunities regulation. This plan should be a working document that's reviewed annually, and you should date and sign it every time you review it. It shouldn't be the responsibility of any one person. It should be developed as a committee, which involves stakeholders from all areas, the parents, the community, the school, and leadership. And when you do your revisions, you should take into consideration the evaluations and feedback from your stakeholders. All right. As part of our federal programs and the role that Sean Cochran had and now Kara Brannon holds here at DESE, we every year have to complete an ESEA program self-monitoring checklist, EL tiered monitoring. And Kara produced a webinar, which is linked here on this slide, that I invite you to go back and look at, that walks you through the requirements of your EL plan. All right, so throughout the rest of the presentation here, you'll see some numbers at the top that refer to this training that Kara did and the requirements for this EL tiered monitoring. All right. So what are the components of an EL or Lau plan? Well, all districts must have a board-adopted policy concerning the education of English learners. And that policy has to tell how English learners are identified, what services are provided, and also in your plan, you have to identify your ESOL or EL or ELD coordinator. The policy must be in a format that parents can understand. And since we're saying that it's in a format that parents can understand, that kind of implies that it should be accessible to parents. So a lot of districts are now putting their Lau plans or their EL plans on their district website. Your EL plan must be board adopted, and there should be a date and the name or position of the board appointed EL coordinator. And that name can either be in the policy itself or in the minutes of the board meeting. All right. The outline of your Lau or EL plan should include the educational approach that you're using, how students are identified, how they are assessed, what services you provide, the staffing and resources, how students are transitioned out of the program and monitored, how they have availability and equal access to all programs, and how your program is evaluated annually and who's in that process. All right. So as I said, these numbers at the top indicate this is part of that, that checklist of EL tiered monitoring. So 1A talks to the board adopted policy. Again, it needs to be adopted by the board, and your policy should include the name or the reference of who created the policy. And then when you submit this, you need to submit the minutes and the date of the board adoption. For this reporting, your policy must include how you identify students, which is referring to your language use survey, how the students are screened, how they are assessed annually, and what services you are going to be providing. And again, this comes from the ESEA Administrative Manual. For this section, it's pages 80 to 88. Okay, 1B, the identification procedure. The LEA has adopted and uses a language use survey. So we have this listed both on the EL Administrative and ELD curriculum webpage. That example of our state's provided language use survey. You also have to submit when you submit your tiered monitoring checklist, a copy of your home language survey or your enrollment document where those home language survey questions are listed. So that's part of that process. All enrollment paperwork for all students. So this isn't just the ones who enroll that you think might be English learners. This should be given to all students so that we don't miss anyone. They're all required to complete a language use survey. And that language use survey has to, at minimum, have 3 required questions. What was the student's first language? Which languages does the student speak at home and with others? And which language or languages does the student hear at home and understand? If they answer any of those 3 questions with something other than English, that identifies them as a potential English language learner. And our EL department suggests that you should include further questions to find out more about the student's language use to help you understand whether or not you need to continue with screening. But every student who is identified as a potential English learner who doesn't have a previous WIDA screener or access score is required to be screened within the first 30 days from the beginning of the school year or 15 days if they enrolled later in the school year. Okay, 1C, again, part of that checklist. For all LEAs that have at least one English learner, they must administer the appropriate screener. You also have to retain documentation that you administered those screeners and that the staff member received the proper training to administer the test. And then those two things will be submitted as part of your self-monitoring checklist. All right. When a language use survey shows that the student is a potential English learner, as I said, that appropriate screener has to be given. You have to have access to the WIDA Secure portal in order to go through that training. And if you need help with setting up that account, you can contact your district test coordinator, or you can contact me. I'm able to set that up, or the WIDA help desk can also assist with that. But your district has to appoint someone who's going to go through that training so that they can administer those assessments. Now, there is an exception to the screener. If you have what we consider to be a true newcomer student, that would be an immigrant, migrant, or refugee in first grade, second semester through 12th grade, who has been in the country for less than 4 months and who can demonstrate compelling evidence that they have not been exposed to English. For those students, you can forego the screener and submit the newcomer screening kit to me. And there is a link here to that kit. It's a series of questions for the parents, and then I think there are 7 questions for the student. You complete that screener with the student and parents, and then send that to me within 15 days of enrollment. I will review it and then approve or deny. If it's approved, you do not have to give the screener. If it's denied, you will have to go back and administer the WIDA screener. And again, make sure that you understand this is for first grade, second grade semester through 12th grade. Kindergarten and first semester of first grade must complete the WIDA kindergarten screener. All right. So here's a identification screening flowchart for how we go through the identification and screening for kindergarten. Again, we ask if they are potential English learners, we administer the screener. If they score, if they're in the first semester of first grade, no, if they're in the first semester of kindergarten and they score a 4.5 or less on just the oral language part of the assessment. In first semester kindergarten, we only give the listening and speaking sections of the screener, mostly because we know and understand that those students probably have not had exposure to reading and writing at this point. So if they score a 4.5 or less on the listening and speaking portions, then they would be identified as LEP, RCV, and MOSIS, and they would be eligible for ELD services, and you would schedule an access for the annual assessment. If they score higher than a 4.5, a 5 or above, they're still identified as LEP. Excuse me, because we cannot exit a student until they take all 4 domains of the assessment. So because they've only had 2 domains, they are still identified. The ELD services are optional. If you feel that they would benefit the student, you most certainly can help them with that. Or you can just check in with the teacher and see how the student's doing. but they do still have to take the access test so that they will have all 4 domains. Okay, for second semester, kindergarten through first grade, first semester. Again, same if they are potential English learners, you administer the whole kindergarten screener for those students. If they score 4.5 or less, they are identified as English learners, entered into the system, receive services, and take the access. At this point, if they score 5.0 or more because they've taken the full battery, they are not considered English learners and would not receive services. In a similar manner for first grade, second semester through 12th grade, they will take the online assessment. And if they score a 4.5 or less, they're identified as needing services. If they score above the 4.5, 5.0 or higher, then they are not considered English learners. Right. Another thing to consider when you are creating your Lau plan or your EL plan are students' transcripts and prior schooling. And creating schedules. So that should be something that you identify that process in your plan. How will you look at transcripts? Who's going to evaluate them? And then some questions that you might ask the students or their families when you are reviewing their transcripts are, what months was your school in session? How many days a week did you have class and how many hours was each class? What topics did you study? Because in some international schools, classes are combined, like a high school math class might have both geometry and trigonometry in the same class, or a science class might be both environmental science and biology within the same class. So looking at those things to see what the student has accomplished and what they still need is very important. And so on the right side, I've given you several links that you can go to help with understanding the transcripts and work on how you can work on scheduling. But that's something you need to include in your plan, how you're addressing such things. All right. And then assessment is something that you need to address in your plan as well. You need to talk about who's going to administer the assessment, how are they trained, do they share that time frame with the administrators, secretaries, teachers, who and how is that shared? Do they describe the test? Do they let people know that this is a test of 4 separate domains that can't all be given at one sitting, that it's set up much like the MAP test where it's supposed to be done over multiple days, um, that it is a high stakes test with federal accountability. So describing those things in your Lau plan is very important. Also, where the test results kept, who's going to manage those, and how are they going to be shared out with both parents and stakeholders within the school system. Important points for your Lau plan. All right, part of the checklist, language assistant programs. So all LEAs that have at least one English learner have to provide a language assistance program that is timely, valid, and reliable for their English learners so that they can participate in all curricular and extracurricular activities. This is without Title III funds. So this is required of all schools, whether you receive special funding or not. It is a core course. So you have to talk about your title, how you're providing those language assistance programs. Then 1D, the EL policy should outline the process to provide language assistance. So how are you providing translation or interpretation services for your parents so that they understand the regular school communications and documentations? This is also cannot be out of Title III funds. This is a requirement of all schools and must be paid for by the school. And this is a federal requirement as well. All right. And then talking about your language assistance program, it has to meet civil rights requirements to make sure that your students gain proficiency and the ability to participate in the standard educational program. So you have to describe how the EL program will address the students' needs and show that it is educationally sound and proven successful. So it's based on research, based on success. So some things to note in your Lau plan are the types of services that will be provided, how will they be implemented, who will provide the services, whether the students will be pulled from class, and if so, how long, making sure that your English learners have access to all subjects, and your facilities. Are they comparable to other programs? So this gets at, where are you housing your EL program? Is your classroom being held in a hallway or in a closet? Or are you giving them a classroom like you would for your reading program or other special programs like ES, special education or anything else? It needs to be equitable across the board. And this statement at the bottom, anytime money is allocated in the budget, you ought to be able to find the related activity present in your schools. Then according to federal law, your program must be based on effective approaches and methodologies and demonstrate success. And the success has to be in acquiring English and being successful in the classroom. All programs have to include a core EL development service that shows that your ELA has to describe the selected program model, how it's implemented, how the staff is certified and qualified, the frequency and duration of the services, and the materials and resources that will be used to implement the program. These are the approved program models in Missouri. We have structured English immersion, content-based ESOL, pull-out, sheltered, resource classroom, newcomer centers, co-teaching, coaching, ELD as a content course, dual language, and early and exit programs or transitional bilingual classes. You can also create your own plan of how you might serve, as long as you can base it on research and effectiveness in classrooms, and your students are showing progress, that's fine. Um, it should kind of be related to one of these other program models, but you can describe your own program and how it fits into that. So you're going to describe, as far as your educational approach, how your program supports the learning needs of the students. You're required to provide, as I said, the core program, whether or not you receive title funds. They must be, any title funds that you receive must be supplemental to that core program. So the core program is required of your school district, even if you don't receive those supplemental funds. And the program has to be provided for all English learners at levels 1 through 4.7, because 4.7 is our exit criteria. Students up to 4.7 are entitled to services by a qualified teacher who is trained in EL strategies. Paraprofessionals can only provide supplemental support and should not be required to pull classes on their own and develop daily lessons and implement things on their own. They need to be under the direct supervision of a certified teacher. Okay, the educational approach has to adhere to federal and state guidelines for reclassification and exiting and monitoring. You have to assess your students annually. You have to make sure that the students are placed appropriately, which cannot be 1 year below, more than 1 year below their age appropriate level. You have to agree to implement specific criteria against inappropriate identification for special services or speech services. You have to establish guidelines to ensure that you're not retaining your students solely because they haven't acquired enough English yet. And you can find more information about these regulations through this link to the non-regulatory guidance on English learners from Department of Education. All right, 1E talks about the teachers. So if your LEA has more than 19 English learners, a full-time, qualified, and ESOL endorsed teacher must be hired with local funds to serve the students. That should be evidenced in your class schedules, and DESE will check the number of ELs that are enrolled in your district and the certification of your ESOL teachers. So they do look when we do this tiered monitoring, whether or not this is in place. So it should also be part of your Lau plan. So when looking at your staffing and your resources, we will look to make sure that you have identified the number and categories of instructional staff that are needed to meet the needs of the students. Um, are the staff qualified to teach the courses? And what steps are you taking to acquire more staff if necessary? And do you have the resources necessary for the program, and how are those resources reviewed? If your LEA has an ELD teacher who is overseeing EL services provided by classroom teachers, so this would be like co-teaching and coaching, have those classroom teachers been sufficiently trained so that they're qualified to provide those core services? And as it's noted here, that has to be more than a 1-day training, and it has to be more than the WIDA Access Administration training. Those don't meet this requirement. It has to be ongoing and sufficient so that the teachers understand how to meet the needs of the students. If you do not have ELD teachers, or if your student to teacher ratio is not where it should be, you need to address in your plan how you're working to rectify that. So as far as funding for the EL teacher, only those who are providing supplemental EL services beyond that core EL program can be funded through Title III. Those are usually paraprofessionals at sometimes, or your EL coordinators can sometimes come from Title III because that's beyond the core program. Your staff must be highly qualified or sufficiently trained in the services for English learners. And also your administrators need to be trained on how to evaluate the ELD program and staff. Also, we have standards specific to English learners, and the types of standards and how those are implemented and evaluated and used within your district should be part of your Lau plan. Also, if you're receiving Title III funds, these must be used to pay for professional development, which might include the review of your standards and use of standards in the district. Again, that professional development must be of sufficient intensity and duration to have a positive impact on the teacher's performance. So not a one and done. Also in your Lau plan, you should describe how we transition students from the program. Describing that 4.7 is the transition peak where we are looking for the student to achieve to exit the program. And then who decides if the student is indeed ready to transition out of the program and who monitors them after transition. That should be included in your plan. And then how often and how the student will be monitored, and then how parents are informed. Once the transition is made from English learner to former English learner and they're on monitor status, for 2 years, you actively monitor them, keeping track of how they're doing, looking at grades, making sure that language is no longer a barrier. If they do struggle, you can always pull them back within those first 2 years. Year 3 and 4 are more for federal monitoring, and you still have to submit how the students are doing, but it isn't active monitoring where the EL teacher is checking on their progress from day to day or month to month. Right. Also, part of your Lau plan should be describing methods to ensure that students are having equitable access to any program, such as special ed or speech or gifted programs if they qualify. Also, do you have or do you know where to obtain the tests or assessments to determine the eligibility for those programs? And then what methods are you using to identify parents of programs and activities that are available? Not just these gifted and other programs, but things like prom and things like graduation activities or field trips, making sure that parents are aware of, that it's in a language that they can understand so that those students can participate as well. And then again, making sure they have equal access to all extracurricular, non-academics like clubs and sports, to eliminating those barriers. All right, then every year, at the end of the year, you should have an evaluation of your program, and how you evaluate should be part of your plan as well, describing um, that what you will do for that evaluation, and that you will modify your program if it's unsuccessful after a legitimate trial, which could be 3 or 4 years. So we don't expect a program to be successful 100% in the first year or two. Usually it takes 3 or 4 years to see how successful a program is. And we deem success as if the participants are achieving proficiency in English and are able to participate in the district's educational program. So when you're looking at evaluation, you want to ensure that 100% of your English learners are correctly identified, that they are assessed, that is reported, that you're providing the services and supports that are needed with the proper teaching and materials. If to be compliant, all of these things need to be met. You need to make sure you have your home language survey, that you're within 30 days of enrollment administering that screener, that you're notifying the parents of the student status, that you're developing a plan or setting goals for the students to achieve proficiency, that you maintain a system to track them, and making sure they're receiving the services they have and that the data is used to inform decisions, that they are taking the annual assessment. All students who are identified should be taking that assessment. That includes students who opt out of the program that you're offering. Students can opt out of the type of service that you provide, but they cannot opt out of services altogether. So it's up to the district to decide how you're going to meet the needs of the student. And those students are still evaluated through the access test every year. And then maintain a system for monitoring those students who have exited. So all of these should be included as part of your Lau plan. Also, it's important to identify how you will work with non-public schools. And there is, this is kind of an outline of what your obligations are to non-public schools. If you are a Title III school, the checklist goes on for some Title III subgrantee compliance checks. They look more deeply into the qualification of your teachers. They make sure that you have a parent notification and rights activities, and that you have parent and family engagement. To be Title III, it's based on the number of English learners we have in our state and how much money we receive from the federal government. And then they have a mathematical equation that tells how many students you have to have in order to qualify for Title III status. This year, that's 77 students or more. So Title III funding is, again, supplemental to your core program. That has not changed under the new ESSA program. So 2A says that all teachers in a EL program must be fluent in English and any other language that they use for instruction. They have to have good written and oral communication skills and certification in that area. And DESE doesn't ask that you send anything in for this one. They will check in our core data on the teacher's certification status. As far as 2B, parent notification, you have to notify the parents within 30 days of the beginning of the school year after the student is identified of the reason for identification, the proficiency level of the student, how it was assessed, how they will be instructed, or in the alternative programs that's available, how it will meet the needs of the student, how it will help them learn English and meet the educational achievement for grade promotion and graduation, how they exit the program, and their parents' rights. You have to submit at least 2 samples of this type of correspondence when you submit your checklist. So the parent notification is written guidance that describes the parent's right to remove their child from the EL program upon request, the type of program, to decline to enroll in a certain kind of program, to choose another program or method of instruction if it's available, to receive assistance in selecting from the programs available. But you have to keep in mind, even with all of this, the student is still identified as an English learner. They still have to receive assistance and they will still be assessed annually, even if the parent opts out of the type of program that's offered. Okay, 2C is talking about family and community engagement. The LEA provides and implements effective engagement activities and strategies for parents, family, and community. These have to be meetings that are held in your district. You keep documentation of those meetings, the meeting minutes, a sign-in sheet, the program materials, or other documentation to show that those meetings have occurred. These need to be more than just fun nights, activity nights. These also need to be meetings where you discuss your Lau plan, you discuss the program types that are available, and get input from the parents on how the program is working and any suggestions for improvement that they may have. You need to describe how you will provide effective outreach to families of English learners and provide ways for them to engage in the educational programs using the Title III funding. And when you're doing this, you need to make sure that you include elementary and secondary levels. So if you're talking about your programs and how they're effective, this is a great time to include those secondary level families to talk about what's available in the schools for their children and what needs the parents see that might not be being met by your program. And again, all of these activities and things should be in a language that the parents can understand. So you need to make provisions for that as well. So that's a lot of information. On this slide, you'll find a link to a template that you can use for creating your plan if you don't already have one. I've also provided a tool or rubric to evaluate a plan that you may have in place, or you can use that to review when you create your plan to make sure you've met all of the components. And then here is another sample Lau plan template for helping you plan. And crafting a Lau plan was a series that we did a few years ago. So this is a link to those recordings as well. Some other helpful links, the DESE ELD webpage. There's a Wakelet where I put together some resources. This is a whole file of sample Lau plans from other states and from within our state. The English Learner Toolkit is kind of set up in the very same way as your Lau plan should be, so you can pull a lot of things from that. Coloring Colorado actually put together a series on how to create a plan at your local level. Then there is a link here to the Every Student Succeeds Act and English Learners, so you can look at the plan itself. And then this link is to your school's obligations, and that's from NCELA. And then your ESEA guidance is also provided there, so you can look at that. These are two other resources where some of the beginning activities we did today came from. This Transforming Schools for English Learners is a very good book, and what school leaders need to know about English learners is very helpful as well. As always, if you have questions, you can contact your mail specialist in your region. They are very happy to help you with any of these questions and walk you through this process as well. And you can always contact me. And I'm going to end by saying Missouri is fortunate to have educators like you. I appreciate you sticking to this and staying with us for assisting our English learners. And thank you for joining us for our check-ins and being here today. And I'm going to stop the camera to allow you to ask any questions that you may have at this time. Thank you very much.